Joining me now from Washington, D.C., former Assistant Secretary of State under the Reagan and Bush 41 administrations and spokesman for the Association of Mature American Citizens, AMAC, Robert Charles. Robert, you know what this is reminding me of right about now is the game of telephone, kind of a bastardized, politicized, governmental version of the game of telephone. And for millennials who have no idea what I'm talking about, it used to be a parlor game that we would play. Maybe in the car we'd play it. You have several people in a row, and the first person would whisper something in the next person's ear, and it would go to the next person and whisper, and the next person. They would start off with 3 blind mice, and by the time it would get to the final person, it would be 3 musketeers. And so we have 2 people, using my analogy, we have 2 people who are both on the phone call, sitting side by side. One in uniform who felt it was his duty to report something unusual, to say the least, about the phone call. But the other person, this Williams, the woman who works for the vice president, was on the phone call, didn't feel the same, didn't report it to anybody. Again, it's a matter of interpretation. That's what this is boiling down to, interpretation with layers of opinion.
Yeah, I think what we're witnessing, sadly, average Americans watching this on television and listening to it, is demagoguery in the worst way. What's happened here is they've set up straw men. They're pretending that the Republicans are attacking Mr. Vindman's patriotism and his service, and that's actually not what's happening. Republicans are questioning him on facts, and in particular on his judgment about those facts. What we know and what people are not saying is that in 2018, this president, President Trump, delivered 200 Javelin missiles and 37 launchers to the Ukrainians. That's 200 more and 37 more than Obama ever delivered. And then he delivered another set of them in 150 with 2 new launchers in October of 2019. So the bottom line is there is no harm here. What I find fascinating is these people are also reaching questions of law. And in fact, the law is with the president. It is not with them. The bottom line is we have a U.S.-Ukraine treaty. People can look it up online. It's straightforward. It offers the United States government the opportunity, very specifically, for criminal information tied to public corruption by any official, U.S. or Ukrainian, over which we would have jurisdiction. And it's very clear. It was ratified in 2000, and Joe Biden was in the Senate and voted for it. Right. So the bottom line is this president requested information which was tied to what is a colorable claim of criminal violation, the selling of influence or perceived selling of influence. Should he have done it in that phone call? I don't know. I mean, should the Attorney General have been the one doing it? Should Rudy Giuliani, who was looking into the origins of the 2016 Ukrainian connection to the Democratic Party, should he have been the one who did it? I don't know. Should Secretary Pompeo have asked? I don't know. But the bottom line is there is a U.S.-Ukraine treaty. This is well within the bounds of that. And to say that Mr. Biden and his son are not subject to that kind of an inquiry means that if you run for president, you get out of jail free card, that all you have to do is be a candidate, and now we have to drop all inquiries tied to any past acts, criminal acts.
And we also know, due to previous testimony, and just intrinsically we know this, that you can condition our aid based on what we need to have done in that foreign country. In other words, we can put conditions on the money we're sending when we should. We should. I found it fascinating, just as a side note, you can talk in just a second. I found it fascinating, just as a side note, that Vindman actually gave advice to the Ukrainians, I don't remember exactly who, it may have been the president, to stay out of U.S. politics. I don't think that's his job, number one. And number two, I don't think it's his job to say to the American people on that phone call, I've read the transcript, you've read the transcript, that national security was threatened. I don't see that. I don't read into that at all, that our U.S. national security, you could make a case that Ukrainian national security was compromised if military aid was being withheld. But how in the world was our national security compromised in any way, shape, or form? And I didn't see anybody really challenge him on this. Yeah, so very good points. 2 very specific add-ons here.
You know, people of good intention can become overzealous and can be wrong. And I think that may be the case with Mr. Vindeman. I don't think that he's unpatriotic. I don't think he thought he wasn't doing his duty. But the bottom line is that legally there was no issue there. And the notion about our national security being, our national security, to the extent that Ukraine not being able to defend itself against Russia is an issue, then President Obama put us in the line of fire in terms of endangering our national security. And one last point on conditioning aid. So I was the Assistant Secretary of State for INL, they call it, under President Bush and Secretary Colin Powell. And we condition aid all the time. We condition it in particular when we're looking at a state which is enduring public corruption issues. And the reason is very straightforward. We do not want to give U.S. tax dollars to a country that is not willing to do investigations into public corruption or doesn't have the capacity to use that money or is going to misuse that money. So we condition it in probably 70 or 80 countries today, and in fact, even the Senate does that. So Patrick Leahy, for example, conditioned aid to Colombia's criminal justice system on investigations that would be done into human rights abuses by their military. He put a hold on that money in order to secure that assurance. So this is not anomalous. They're trying to whip up, it seems to me, people are trying to whip up an impeachment claim out of nothing. You know, it's a Rumpelstiltskin issue here, trying to turn hay into gold, and I don't think it's going to work.
And one last thing, the deliverables. We heard the Lieutenant Colonel talk about deliverables. This would be the quid pro quo, and that he interpreted the phone call as not a request but a demand. Again, this is an interpretation. It's in black and white in the phone transcript. Hey, I have a favor to ask. But of course, we have the Lieutenant Colonel saying, well, I interpret that favor that's in black and white, that was heard by apparently a couple dozen people listening on the phone call. He's the only one so far who's interpreting this as a demand. And of course, the Democrats, because this is a highly politicized, highly partisan process, they're going to take this word demand and they're going to run with it, and they're going to try and use it against the President of the United States, when we see in black and white there was no inference to demand. It was a request to follow through, as you pointed out, by a treaty that we have with the Ukraine signed many, many years ago.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There is no demand in that transcript, and there is no reasonable basis for arguing that it is a demand. And in fact, if you want to talk about the quid pro quo, meaning you give us this and we'll give you that, go back in time and look at the timeline. No one's looking at the timeline. They opened this investigation into Burisma and all those associated with it in February or March. This call occurs in July. So, and the other thing is that in 2018, we had already released aid, more aid by 100% than President Obama had ever released to them. So I think it's much of a muchness, to borrow from Shakespeare. What they're trying to do here is create something from nothing. And I think it's sad because it's a waste of money, it's a waste of time. The Intelligence Committee has a jurisdiction that's focused on CIA and FBI, not focused on impeachment, yet that's what they've done here. They're just fallacy on fallacy. And I guess I hope that the average American looking at this says, give me a break. You got to be kidding me. Get out of this business of impeachment. This is, impeachment 2.0, and I don't want you to go there with my tax dollars.
If there was a demand in all of this that I could see, it was on the part of Joe Biden when he was Vice President of the United States.
Well, there's a different issue.
Yeah, he put on a demand to fire the prosecutor. That, to me, is a violation of the Emoluments Clause, and I believe that needs to be investigated. And do you agree with that?
I do, and in fact, what really ought to happen is that Joe Biden and his son should be material witnesses on the House side. Notably, this Chairman Schiff refuses to make eye contact with half of the Republicans, but he also refuses to bring those two witnesses in or to allow the whistleblower to come in.
Right.
So if you're really in a fair and impartial effort, that's not this.
And this is because of the rules passed by the House, which all Republicans voted against and all Democrats except for two voted in favor of, but they're nowhere near resembling the rules that were passed in 1998 when it was a fair process for Bill Clinton. Robert, thank you.
Want to see more videos like this? Click on the link below and subscribe to One American News on YouTube, and call your cable provider and kindly demand that One American News is added to your lineup. Call and subscribe today.